Dr. Marcel, Mr. Marcel, please excuse me if I mispronounce your name, former commander of the Woonsocket Police Department on behalf of the Fraternal Order of Police. Doctor?
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Marcel Bolsoley. I spent 21 years on the Woonsocket Police Department. I spent several of those years working in internal affairs. When I left the police department, I earned a PhD, and I've been teaching for the past 20 years, teaching policing courses, researching police, studying police, all aspects of policing, ethics, misconduct, disciplinary procedures. I also want to point out that I taught a seminar at Roger Williams University for about 10 years on the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, and that seminar was for police officers, police chiefs, union officials. So that being said, I just want to address first one point made by Mr. Batista. I don't believe there's anywhere in the Bill of Rights that said that the police officer conducting the investigation must be from the police department, because I know in many cases the state police have gone in and investigated things that may not have been criminal but may have been administrative in nature. And I'm not ashamed to tell you that I was the subject of one of those investigations, which ironically arose out of an internal investigation I was doing, and the state police were brought in being impartial to investigate that incident. So the attorneys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe it specifically states from that agency. I hope that clears that up. So many of the things I was going to address today have already been spoken to by Mr. Colucci, but some of the points I wanted to bring up. First of all, one of the goals of the Bill of Rights, and we've been talking a lot about it today, is when the Bill of Rights came into play, and which still exists today, you have three interests that need to be taken into consideration. Rights of police officers to fair and appropriate treatment, protection from improper procedures, the right of police managers to manage and run their police departments, and probably just as important is accountability to the public. And as we know from our talks today, and probably more that you've had in your hearings, that's a difficult balance to maintain. Okay, so a couple of things I do want to say. In the time that I spent working in internal affairs and in the time I spent teaching it at Roger Williams University, it's been my opinion is that the Bill of Rights works. I'm not saying it's perfect, and I'm not saying it may not need some tweaking, but overall it does work. It's been my experience that many times when there's issues with the Bill of Rights, it's because one of the parties involved, whether it was on the municipal side, whether it was on the union side, the officer side, lacked an understanding of what the statute called for. And as the attorneys can attest to, when you look at many of the cases that have gone to court for review, it typically involves some type of technical aspect to the Bill of Rights, time limits not being followed and things of that sort. But I really do believe the Bill of Rights does work. It lays out what I believe is a fair procedure for the investigation of police officers. Both sides know what to expect when they walk into that room. Everything is clearly laid out. Okay. What I really wanted to talk about, though, today is the importance of fair and just procedures as we look at this balancing act. There's a growing body of research that's been looking at both procedural justice, and that involves due process and how police officers interact with the public. And of course, the more the officers adhere to due process and proper procedures, it increases the legitimacy of the police in the eyes of the public. But there's also a great deal of research that looks at organizational justice, procedural justice within the police organization. And what they've been finding in this research is there's a clear correlation between unfair treatment and the officer's reactions to that unfair treatment. Many times the officer's reactions to that is manifested in work slowdowns, not being willing to support the organization's goals and policies. Some research has found that it actually may create more misconduct, and again, I'm talking about unfair procedures and policies. Some research has also found that sanctions alone don't work with police officers, that they get sanctioned for misconduct, and they're very likely to engage in misconduct again. And the last point, the thing that the research has pointed out is that, the code of silence, that unfair procedures within a police department may actually work to strengthen the code of silence because officers don't want to see other officers unfairly treated. what this research is suggesting, and it's not saying favoring one police disciplinary procedure over another, what it's really suggesting is that whatever the police organization does, they need to look at the fairness of the procedures. And what exactly is procedural justice? Well, we've heard talk about laudability and the right to be heard, and that's certainly a part of it, right? When we look at it, we look at being treated with dignity, we look at the ability to be heard, we look at fair treatment, and we look at the ability of the aggrieved party, in this case the police officer, to be able to tell their story. This is the same type of thing you see with procedural justice as it's supposed to be practiced by police officers in the field. One of the things that's noted, and I've done a lot of work in the state of Massachusetts working on police reform, and we're looking at the police organization overall. How can we better the police organization and put better policing? We look a lot at President Obama's 21st century task force report on policing, which many police organizations, the IACP, have all looked to as a blueprint for reforming policing moving forward. And I call your attention to recommendation 1.4. Law enforcement agencies should promote legitimacy internally within the organization by applying the principles of procedural justice. I don't want to read you all this language and insult you. Some of you may already be familiar with it, but you're certainly free to look it up. But one of the things that this task force report called for was clear articulation of organizational core values and the transparent creation and fair application of an organization's policies, protocols, and decision-making processes. And the thought is that if the workforce is actively involved in the policy development, they're more likely to buy into it, and hopefully long-term is this is going to carry over into police officer interactions with people in the street. I call your attention to the task force report action item 1.4.2. Law enforcement agency leadership should examine opportunities to incorporate procedural justice into the internal discipline process, placing additional importance on values adherence rather than adherence to rules. Looking for a different approach. As we're looking towards the professionalization of policing, as you're looking to revise the LEOBoR, hope you keep some of these principles in mind, that there still needs to be a fair and just procedures and policies in place for police officers, that we want to look at positive discipline rather than negative discipline. Yes, there's a time when negative discipline is certainly called for, but there really needs to be an honest discussion of police disciplinary procedures. I note that former Chief of Police Darrell Stevens, who authored a piece on police discipline for Harvard University, that one of the failings of police departments is they fail to differentiate between an honest mistake and malicious conduct, and they treat both the same. We've heard some talk today about, looking to retain police officers, the valuable assets for the police departments. And if somebody made an honest mistake, I don't know that we should be treating them to the same process as somebody who acted maliciously. And just something I wanted to point out. We fix mistakes through training. What Chief Stevens argued for was a behavioral focus on discipline, focusing change behavior through both training and education. So that's really the crux of what I wanted to argue for, is that we want to retain the due process aspects, in this legislation where possible. The last thing I wanted to point out is, if we're really truly interested in professionalizing police departments and reforming police, I understand this commission is solely tasked with looking at LEOBoR, and I understand that. But you really need to look at the bigger picture, is that police departments, my humble opinion, but based on a lot of research, don't do enough training, whether it's pre-service training, in-service training, after completing the police academy. The police academies are not long enough. Training needs to look at both competence and context. And very often training processes are rushed through because of lack of funds. We don't necessarily train to competence, and we don't necessarily train to context. And that's really important. Policy is extremely important. Every police department needs to have comprehensive, up-to-date policies that meet current legal standards of the day. Those policies need to be revised annually. And more importantly, they need to be disseminated, and police officers need to be trained in them. Supervision to make sure policies are enforced, not enforced, but the policies are carried out the way that they're supposed to be. Correcting mistakes, and taking disciplinary action where necessary. And finally, the discipline, as I spoke to, both positive and negative discipline. The last thing that I want to say is when we look at this professionalization of police department, the policing, police department should probably look at early intervention systems. And I'm not going to get into a long discussion, but it's a model designed to look at police behavior, look for problematic behavior, and try to intervene in these behaviors before they become a problem. Hopefully the committee will give some reflection to these matters as well. I will stick around for a few minutes for questions, if any, and I thank you for your time and listening to me.
Yeah, any questions? If not, please hang in there with me. I know we've gone a lot longer than we normally go, but we just have two more presenters. We have